Final Exam, an Avatar The Last Airbender fanfiction. Chapter 3.
Iroh, former general and heir to the Fire Nation throne, current uncle and teacher to a banished prince, blew the steam off the top of his cup of tea before tilting the delicate china to his lips. He did so partially because he really did enjoy savoring the unique flavors that each cup of tea brought to him, but mostly to hide his disappointment at the debacle occurring on the forward deck of the small battleship. His student and nephew, Prince Zuko, was drilling a battle guitar for the 5th time. Unfortunately, it didn't take an eye as skilled as Iroh's to see that no improvement had been made from the first time he had attempted the exercise. The teen's moves were still reactionary instead of anticipatory. His counterattacks were effective only because of the amount of energy being put behind them. In short, if the moves hadn't been previously determined, his nephew would have been in a world of trouble. After the final shots of flame were exchanged, Prince Zuko and his 2 sparring partners for the day turned to look expectantly at Iroh. He set his cup of tea down and plastered a polite smile on his face.
Very good. That will be all for today.
Freed from having to repetitively spar with the irritable hair, the 2 soldiers exited from the deck with barely suppressed enthusiasm. Zuko's eyes narrowed. He folded his bare arms in front of his chest and glared at his uncle. Iroh took it as a good sign that the teen at least understood that his performance did not merit a passing grade. And he was quite right. Normally, Iroh would have made him repeat the drill until some sign of improvement was shown, but the former Dragon of the West had decided that until the source of Prince Zuko's frustration was uncovered, no progress could be expected.
Prince Zuko, why don't you come have a cup of tea with me?
I don't need any tea.
The teenager turned his back on his uncle, standing strong and straight next to the starboard rail of the ship's bow. For a moment he lingered there, proud and angry, but Iroh could see the slight softening of his posture, the minute forward slumping of his shoulders as the burden he carried settled around him like an invisible cloak. The men of the ship were conspicuously absent, leaving nephew and uncle in relative peace. Iroh sipped his tea and waited. Patience was a virtue he had in abundance. In the end, he was rewarded. The Prince of the Fire Nation abandoned the lonely rail for a seat on the metal deck, though still far enough away from the table to avoid appearing conciliatory.
What seems to be troubling you, my nephew? Is it Zhao's promotion?
It wasn't exactly a difficult guess for the experienced man to make. The teen's reaction served as an instant confirmation. Springing back to his feet, Zuko's thin form began to restlessly pace the deck, reminding the still-seated Iroh of a wild beast in captivity. Of course, in a way, he was a captive, and that was the problem.
How? How can I beat him, Uncle? He has so many resources now. I have 1 ship. How can I capture the Avatar before Zhao?
Ah, Prince Zuko. Which is the easier predator to avoid in a forest? A rampaging saber-toothed lion moose, or the small but deadly iguana viper? Having more numbers does not necessarily mean that Zhao will win. In fact, it may end up being a disadvantage.
It's not just quantity of men, Uncle. He has quality too, like the Yuyan archers.
The Yuyan? Where did you hear this?
Zuko's back suddenly stiffened. He remained staring out at sea while trying to come up with an answer that was not quite a lie. He certainly couldn't tell his uncle that he found out while masquerading as a thief, especially since the Blue Spirit was rumored to have freed the Avatar from Zhao's imprisonment. It had been then that Zuko had discovered the skill of the Yuyan. A small unit of them had gone out and accomplished with archery what no bender had ever been capable of, successfully capturing the Avatar.
I overheard it at our last port of call.
Zuko could feel Iroh's eyes staring at his back. The statement wasn't entirely untrue. It had been at their last port that he had taken one of the small landing vessels and embarked on a secret spying mission on Zhao. The newly appointed admiral was a sneaky, underhanded bastard, and in Zuko's opinion, a rival necessary of keeping his eye on. At that point in time, he had no way of knowing that spying on Zhao would lead him to aid the Avatar.
I see. I'm surprised that Colonel Shiloh would give them up. Although I suppose as an admiral, Zhao would have poured rank on him. That's too bad. The Yuyan are most definitely an asset. Not that you can't still beat Zhao, Prince Zuko. Never give up hope.
The older man took a sip of tea to recover from his slip-up. Zuko remained at the port side rail, watching as the water smoothly parted before the metal bow of the ship. He was moving forward, but was he really getting anywhere?
Hey, I used to be good friends with a boy who went on to become a great Yuyan archer.
Zuko suppressed the urge to slump at the rail. Sometimes he could swear that his uncle just talked to hear the sound of his own voice. What difference did it make if he used to know a Yuyan? What was important was the here and the now and capturing the Avatar. Nothing else mattered. Why couldn't his uncle see that?
We've kept in touch over the years. He's the head instructor for all the Yuyan now.
Iroh took a sip of his tea. He lowered his cup and blinked in surprise. Somehow his nephew had transported himself from the rail to a spot next to him on the deck in a blink of an eye. Gone was the sour, defeated look. Now Zuko's eyes burned with an eager excitement.
You know the head, Yuyan. Why didn't you say something before? With him on my side, I can get all the archers I need to capture the Avatar.
No, Prince Zuko. You misunderstood. The Yuyan don't have ranks like regular soldiers. They are all equal. They will only take orders from one person, and one person only. Unfortunately, that person is now Admiral Zhao.
But you said...
I said I am friends with the head instructor. That is all. I'm sorry. I did not mean to get your hopes up.
Zuko rose from the deck, the eagerness on his face quickly replaced by anger.
Then why did you say anything at all? Unless it has to do with capturing the Avatar, I don't want to know about it.
The Fire Nation prince stalked away. He was too old to stomp, but Iroh could still feel the vibrations from his heavier-than-normal footsteps through the metal deck. The former general sighed as the heavy footsteps rapidly faded away. He forgave his nephew for the outburst. Zuko was going through a difficult time, and it had changed him somewhat from the boy that he had once been. Iroh knew that the blame did not lie within the boy's own spirit, but elsewhere. He had been burned and banished from all that he knew at the tender age of 14. 2 years had been spent searching aimlessly for an avatar that did not seem to exist. And now the only hope had been found in the form of a 12-year-old airbender. It seemed to be constantly snatched from under Zuko's nose. The fact that Zhao, an adult, a master firebender, and an admiral, was determined to beat Zuko to his prize wasn't helping matters at all. Iroh leaned back to stare at the azure sky. The vast expanse of blue only broken by the faint translucent clouds here and there. Zuko was only 16, too young to understand that life was like a journey on a long winding road, and like any journey of distance, one was bound to discover both smooth sections and rough patches. Unfortunately, the teen was on a prolonged rough patch. Iroh could do nothing to end Zuko's banishment. The prince's honor could only be restored if he captured the Avatar. As a retired general and uncle, he was there to provide guidance and support only. Iroh's gaze shifted back down to the still empty deck. He rubbed on his beard. Of course, everyone could use a helping hand every now and again.
I suppose a letter couldn't hurt anything. We are old friends after all.
The dragon smiled and took another sip of tea.
This is so boring.
Shiori's hands continuously moved through the seemingly endless task of sanding arrow shafts. She had thought it odd her first time around that one had to prove their skills with a bow and arrow in order to be considered for Yuyan training, but the first year of said training consisted of doing everything but shooting a bow and arrow. Instead, the first-year students spent most of their time learning how to make the tools of their trade, as well as performing a variety of exercises intended to build up their stamina and endurance. It was heartbreaking to some students that archery simply wasn't on the agenda. That and the rule of silence probably accounted for the large dropout rate for first years. Shiori carefully inspected the cedar shaft she had been sanding. Deeming it smooth enough, she placed it in the dung pile in the center of the long wooden workbench and started another. Each workbench seated 4 students, 2 to a side, and there were 20 workbenches in all in the large rectangular building. In the beginning of the year, all the positions were filled. At the end, only about half the seats would be occupied. The classes grew smaller and smaller as each year passed. Usually, only 2 or 3 ended up passing the 5th test and moved on to train directly under a Yuyan archer out in the real world.
And I will be one of those students. I have the skills. All I have to do is work on my attitude. If Keisuke can be a weapon, then so can I. Nothing will stand in my way.
She felt eyes upon her. One of the first-year students seated on the opposite side of the workbench was staring at her again. Her presence amongst the first years had garnered a lot of gawks and snickers at first. Children forbidden to speak or ask questions were left with few options for communication. She had dealt with the unwanted attention to her punishment by ignoring it. What else could she do? Now that a week had passed, though, she found the gazes to be increasingly annoying. At the age of 14, Shiori was taller than almost all of the first years, even though she was of average height for her age. She sat ramrod straight on her stool. Posture was important for good archery, a lesson that most of the bent-over amateurs had yet to learn. Narrowing her eyes and thinning her lips in an expression she hoped would make her look more like a true Yuyan, she raised her eyes to meet those of the dark-haired boy. He jerked unexpectedly at the contact, but didn't look away.
Loser.
His mouthed words caused the other 2 students at the table to break out into giggles. That was their downfall. One of the 4 instructors assigned to this year's group descended upon the table in a flash. Faced with the scowl of a genuine Yuyan, the first years quickly directed their attention back to the task of sanding an arrow. The teacher gave Shiori a pointed look as if she were the sole cause of trouble, before drifting away. The 4th-year student suppressed a sigh. She brushed a strand of straight brown hair back behind one ear before continuing on with her task of sanding the cedar shaft in her hands. It wasn't until she was sure that the instructor's attention was elsewhere that she used her longer legs to her advantage and planted a sharp kick into the shin of the dark-haired boy.
Ow!
True to their nature, one of the adults reappeared at the long wooden table.
30 push-ups, Shun.
That was child's play compared to the discipline Shiori was used to. Still, she almost felt sorry for the younger boy as he was escorted away from the workbench.
Being Yuyan isn't supposed to be easy. Better to learn the lesson now than later.
Oblivious to the fact that her own thoughts were shallower echoes of the sentiments expressed by Shi-Yun and Master Zorin, Shiori continued with the mind-numbing task of sanding arrow shafts. The other 2 first years had put their noses back to the grindstone too, lest they attract the undue attention of the already quick-to-pounce instructors. The 14-year-old girl was still feeling a little bit regretful of her actions against the first-year boy, despite her best efforts to suppress them.
He looked a little bit like Keisuke.
Her memories of her older brother were becoming slightly fuzzy with time. In fact, the last time she had seen him had been towards the end of her 2nd year of training. Keisuke's hair was darker than hers, a rich mahogany which highlighted the best advantage under the light of the sun. His eyes took after those of their firebender parents, more red than brown, with a hint of gold playing through them. Although she had kept on the lookout for her elder brother since arriving on the island, Shiori had only seen him once. The memory of the incident was etched in her mind. She had been participating in the morning exercises, which included a 5-mile run. Midway through the familiar trek, a sudden stitch in her side caused her to pull up short, panting to ease the pain. What attracted her attention to a grass-covered hill, she did not know, but there he was, standing there. It was undeniably her brother, standing amongst the knee-high grasses in an archery stance, one arm hanging behind his back as if he had just released a shot. He cast off the tan and brown uniform of a trainee, looking more like a real Yu-Yan, although his headband had still been a 5th-year red. For a moment, they just stared at each other, until the joy swelling in Shiori's heart made her want to call out to him. Unable to do that, she had channeled the impulse into the motion of a frantic wave, one that was cut short when the familiar form of Master Zorin appeared on the hill beside her brother. The elderly Yu-Yan had clapped a hand on Kesuke's shoulder and led him away. It was shortly after that when Shiori had found out that her brother had graduated from Sumatra Island. The memory of that day, the image of Kesuke's proud archery stance cast against the rich summer sky, gave her the strength to tough it out through the worst of times here. The fact that her beloved brother was out there somewhere, a full Yu-Yan archer, motivated her even more than her love of archery. Kesuke had seen her. He knew she was following after him. Failure now was inconceivable. The sound of a bell being struck echoed through the silent room.
Lunch.
Placing her thoughts of the past away as she straightened up her work area, Shiori dusted herself off and followed the rest of the students out of the room. A smile, perhaps the first genuine one of the day, graced her lips. Being sent to study with the first years meant no archery training for 2 weeks, a punishment beyond punishment for the talented girl. Lunchtime, however, was free time, and unlike the white headband-wearing first years, Shiori possessed her own bow and supply of arrows. The smile widened. It was time to practice. The blaze of yellow stood out from the surrounding sea of white, like a beam of sunlight breaking through an overcast sky. Not that Zorin needed such a blatant hint to locate his target. Years of being a Yu-Yan archer had trained his eyes to find and fixate on a subject almost instantly. Resting his thin body against the cool stonework of the open second-story window frame, he was all but invisible to the gathering of first-year students in the courtyard below. Many were absorbed by consuming their lunches, keeping to the rule of silence. Only the echoes of chairs being moved back and forth, the clatter of utensils against the plates, and the soft clacking of shoes against cobblestones could be heard. His attention, however, was not upon the diners below, but on a large group of students that had moved beyond the courtyard. The problematic 4th-year student had set up 2 straw targets about 100 feet from where she was standing, the centers of which around 6 feet apart. Forbidden from using tools of their future trade, it was no wonder that so many of the first years congregated to watch the spectacle. Zorin narrowed his eyes. Shiori was definitely bending the terms of her punishment, but he decided to allow it. The bow she was using was one she had made herself, and the lunchtime break only lasted an hour. The Master Yu-Yan felt a presence behind him, but did not acknowledge it, keeping his focus on the student below. Shiori had taken up 2 arrows, drawing both back simultaneously. He waited and watched along with his unseen companion as the girl struggled to aim 2 arrows at the same time. She released, and both arrows found their respective targets, although neither was close to the bullseye. Undeterred, the 14-year-old reached into her quiver for 2 more arrows.
Well, she has ambition and talent both. I'll give her that.
Have you even begun teaching your students this skill, Shi-Yun?
No.
They fell silent as Shiori's second attempt went awry. 1 arrow hit a bullseye, and the second ended up clattering off a high stone wall behind the targets. Even from this distance, the elder Yu-Yan's sharp eyes could see the girl's grimace. A smile tugged on his lips as a mild breeze tickled through his wispy white hair and rustled the paper of a letter scroll resting in his hand. A Master Yu-Yan, Zorin could shoot 4 arrows at once and hit dead center of 4 different targets, provided they were all reasonably close together. He could tell that Shiori's troubles weren't caused so much by a lack of skill, but in that her small hands lacked the size and strength to properly aim 2 arrows at once without the knowledge of how to do so. Still, she was making a worthy effort.
Talented and ambitious both.
It doesn't change the fact that she's not meant to be Yu-Yan.
As Zorin's red-encircled midnight orbs focused on the younger master, Shi-Yun's hawk-like face hardened.
She might have the talent. Hell, she might even be stubborn enough to find a way to pass the final exam. But she'll only suffer in the long run.
The headmaster raised a white brow at the younger man's tone. The matter-of-fact statement carried with it a taint of bitterness and more than a little worry. The elder man knew Shi-Yun was not speaking out of spite, but rather from experience. The silence stretched out for a moment until Shi-Yun inclined his head as a slight apology for his outburst. The elder Yu-Yan gave his companion an accepting smile. Shi-Yun had a reputation for being a hard and unforgiving taskmaster. Few of his students would guess that the man really had their best interests at heart. Being one of the few that the elaborate system of tests had failed to catch made the fifth-year teacher quite uniquely qualified for rooting out the last of the unworthy. The sound of applause rippled through the courtyard, attracting both men's attention. The young teen had apparently almost hit a bullseye with both of her arrows. True to her desire to be the best of the best, though, Shiori wasted no time in reaching for more missiles. Almost wasn't good enough.
Whether or not she continues to pursue her quest to become Yuyan is her choice, and no one else's, Shi-Yun. As long as the talent and desire are there, it is our duty to train it.
Will you give her the final exam at the end of the year?
Zorin sighed. That question had been troubling him ever since Shiori began training with the fifth years instead of with their own year group. The final exam was meant to determine whether or not the student was worthy of personal attention from a full-fledged Yu-Yan. It tested not the skills of the archer, but their spirit, their ability to live life as a Yu-Yan archer. Privately, Zorin found himself often agreeing with the fifth-year instructor. It had been perhaps a mistake to allow the girl to move up a year in her training. He had seen her potential as an archer and wanted it to flourish. Allowing a talented student to skip a grade was rare, but not unheard of. Shiori's natural abilities were beyond those of most trainees, coupled with her drive to catch up to her brother, and it made the perfect combination for an exceptional student. At the time, he had given little thought for her spirit. After all, her brother had passed the final exam without hesitation.
She does alright with survival training. No problems with hunting. It is possible that we are underestimating her.
A quiet snort was Shi-Yun's response to this.
We are teachers, Shi-Yun. Our job is not to solve the problems of our students. We give them the tools necessary and allow them to figure things out for themselves. I appreciate your concerns, but I can see no purpose in making Shiori repeat the 5th year. She has the skills required to move on. The matter is out of our hands.
Shi-Yun's face showed a moment of resignation, before turning as impassive as the surrounding stone hallway.
It is as you say, Master Zorin.
The younger man bowed and moved on, leaving the headmaster alone with his thoughts. A sentiment akin to pity floated through Zorin's heart as his red-encircled eyes watched the younger man depart. Few would know as well as Shi-Yun the consequences of becoming a Yu-Yan without having the spirit of one, and his fears in regards to the young Shiori were well-founded. The very drive and determination that made her excel as a student might very well be enough to enable her to pass a test designed to stop those not meant to become a Yu-Yan. With a sigh, the white-haired man redirected his attention back down to the courtyard. The child in question was still practicing. Ignoring the growing audience of first-years around her, the arrows were hitting more reliably now, inching their way closer and closer to the red bullseye in the center of each target. The wind picked up, rustling the long-forgotten letter scroll still held loosely in one wrinkled hand. Zorin stared at it. The missive had been from an old friend, one who had a problem almost as vexing as his own. The headmaster's first impulse had been to refuse the politely and vaguely worded request, but now as the lunch bell rang signaling the end of break, he considered it anew. Perhaps this was just the opportunity he needed to present Shiori with a valuable lesson before it was too late.
Final Exam was written by Magnusrae. Avatar The Last Airbender is owned by Nickelodeon, Michael Dante DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko. The narrator for this story is Samantha White. The voice of Iroh is Jake Mate. The voice of Zuko is DCODE. The voice of Shiori is Drew Hill. The voice of Shi-Yun is Sleiphner. The voice of Zorin is Genndy Oda C.O.G. Additional voices are also provided by Genndy Oda C.O.G. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.